our conversation tonight. We're back down to the five of us here on stage. I thought we'd talk a little bit more big picture. This has been called, in addition to this unprecedented primary contest the GOP is in the midst of, a battle for the soul of the Republican Party. Governor Romney, the question is about that soul. What have you done to further the cause of conservatism as a Republican leader?
Well, number one, I've raised a family. And with my wife, we've raised 5 wonderful sons, and we have 16 wonderful grandkids. Number two, I've worked in the private sector. The idea that somehow everything important for conservatism or for America happens in government is simply wrong. I've been in the private sector. I worked in one business that was in trouble and helped turn it around. Another I started. And as part of that, we were able to create thousands and thousands of jobs. And then I took an opportunity to become governor of a state that was slightly Democrat. About 85% of my legislature was Democrat. And I worked very hard to promote a conservative agenda. We cut taxes 19 times. We balanced the budget every year. Put in place a rainy day fund of over $2 billion by the time I left. We were also successful in having English immersion in our schools, driving our schools to be #1 in the nation. That kind of a conservative model in a state like Massachusetts was a model in many respects that other states can look at and say, okay, conservative principles work. We were able to reach across the aisle to fight for conservative principles, and now I'm taking that to a presidential campaign, wrote a book about those principles that lay out why I believe they're right for America.
Mr. Speaker, you've been talking a lot about conservative principles in this campaign so far. Is that enough for you? Is that good enough?
Look, I don't want to spend my time commenting on that. I'd like to just tell you that I went to a Goldwater organizing session in 1964. I met with Ronald Reagan for the first time in 1974. I worked with Jack Kemp and Art Laffer and others to develop supply-side economics in the late 70s. I helped Governor Reagan become President Reagan. I helped pass the Reagan economic program, and I worked with the National Security Council on issues involving the collapse of the Soviet Empire. I then came back, organized a group called GOPAC, spent 16 years building a majority in the House for the first time since 1954, the first re-elected majority since 1928, developed the Conservative Opportunity Society, talked about big ideas, big solutions. So I think it's fair to say I've spent most of my lifetime trying to develop a conservative movement across this country that relates directly to what we have to do. And I think only a genuine conservative who's in a position to debate Obama and to show how wide the gap is between Obama's policies and conservatism can in fact win, because he's going to spend $1 billion trying to smear whoever the nominee is, and we better be prepared to beat him in the debate and prove exactly how wrong his values are and how wrong his practices are.
Which, Senator Santorum, gets us back to electability, the gap between the Republican Party and the president. Some of the newspaper headlines about this gathering we were going to have tonight. In Florida, Romney seeks to link Gingrich to foreclosure crisis. And here's a second one. The verdict is in. Mitt Romney's Bain Capital problem is real. What's the net effect of all this, of the tax release tomorrow, of the Freddie Mac release tonight, on your party, say, your candidacy as you try to go forward?
Well, I would say that there are more fundamental issues than that, where there's a gap and a problem with the two of the gentlemen who are up here with me. And one is on the biggest issue that we have to deal with in this election that's crushing the economy, will crush it even further and crush freedom, and that's Obamacare. Governor Romney's plan in Massachusetts was the basis for Obamacare. Speaker Gingrich, for 20 years, supported a federal individual mandate, something that Pam Bondi is now going to the Supreme Court saying is unconstitutional. Speaker Gingrich, for 20 years, up until last year, supported an individual mandate, which is at the core of Obamacare. If you look at cap and trade, Governor Romney was very proud to say that he was the first state in the country as governor to sign a cap on CO2 emissions. The first state in the country to put a cap, believing in the global warming, and criticized Republicans for not believing in it, as did, by the way, Speaker Gingrich, who was for a cap and trade program with incentives, business incentive, but was for the rubric of cap and trade, not specifically the cap and trade bill that was out there. Again, huge, huge differences between my position and where President Obama is, but not so on two major issues. You go down and you look at the Wall Street bailouts, I said before. Here's one where you have folks who preach conservatism, private sector, and when push came to shove, they got pushed. They didn't stand tall for the conservative principles that they argued that they were for, and as a result we ended up with this bailout that has injected government into business like it had never been done before. They rejected conservatism when it was hard to stand. It's gonna be hard to stand whoever this president's gonna be elected. It's gonna be tough. There is gonna be a mountain of problems. It's gonna be easy to be able to bail out and compromise your principles. We have gentlemen here on the three issues that got the Tea Party started, that are the base of the conservative movement now in the Republican Party. And there is no difference between President Obama and these two gentlemen, and that's why this election here in Florida is so critical, that we have someone that actually can create a contrast between the president and the conservative point of view.
Congressman Paul, are these two men in the middle insufficiently conservative for you?
Well, I think that the problem is nobody's to define what being conservative means.
Go ahead.
And I think that is our problem. Conservative means we have smaller government and more liberty. And yet, if you ask what have we done, I think we've lost our way completely. Our rhetoric is still pretty good. But when we get in charge, we expand the government. You talk about Dodd-Frank, but we gave Sarbanes-Oxley. We gave debts as well, you know, when we're in charge. So if it means limited government, you have to ask a basic question: what should the role of government be? The founders asked that question, had a revolution, wrote a constitution. And they said the role of government ought to be to protect liberty. It's not to run a welfare state and not to be the policeman of the world. And so if you're a conservative, how can you be conservative and cut food stamps, but you won't cut spending overseas? There's not a nickel or penny that anybody will cut on the conservative side overseas spending, and we don't have the money. They're willing to start more wars. So I say if you're conservative, you want small government across the board, especially in personal liberty. What's wrong with having people, the government, out of our personal lives? So this is what we have to decide: what conservative means, what limited government means. And I have a simple suggestion. We have a pretty good guide, and if we follow the Constitution, government would be very small, and we would all be devoted conservatives.
Governor Romney again tonight, so-called Romney Care and so-called Obamacare have been positioned very closely side by side by your opponent, the senator, and again, you've been called insufficiently conservative.
You know, I have a record. You can look at my record. I just described what I had accomplished in Massachusetts. It's a conservative record. Also, the fun of running against Ted Kennedy. What a great thrill that was. I didn't beat him, but he had to take a mortgage out on his house to make sure that he could defeat me. I believe that the policies that he put in place had hurt America and helped create a permanent underclass in this country. My health care plan, by the way, is one that under our Constitution we're allowed to have. The people in our state chose a plan which I think is working for our state. At the time we crafted it, I was asked time and again, is this something that you would have the federal government do? I said, absolutely not. I do not support a federal mandate. I do not support a federal one-size-fits-all plan. I believe in the Constitution. That's why the Attorney General here is saying, absolutely not. You can't impose Obamacare on the states. What I will do if I'm president, I will repeal Obamacare and return to the states the authority and the rights the states have to craft their own programs to care for their own poor.